Yeah, my name's Will Page, the Chief Economist at the PRS Music in London. Chief Economist, my job's kind of twofold. I'm providing analytical support to my colleagues in the industry, be it negotiations, communications, legal issues, and also economic insight to the wider media industry. So an insight bringing new ways of looking at the music industry to a wide audience, and that's essentially what we're doing here at Pop Academy in Germany. If you had believed a lot of the consultants and the armchair critics of the music industry, the CD is apparently dead. The CD is dead, there's no more life in the CD. If you actually look at the facts, which is always interesting, you'll find that Susan Boyle, a great Scottish artist, well, maybe not such a great Scottish artist, but okay, a Scot, Susan Boyle sold 1.6 million CDs, dead things, to the British population last year. Perhaps a more interesting example would be the band JLS, which is perhaps more of a urban soul pop outfit. They have sold well over 1 million dead things called CDs to the British population last year. So, what's the future? Well, one thing we know is that the CD's not dead. People still like to buy CDs. It'd be interesting to understand deeper why that is, especially with the JLS example. Is it parents buying the CDs for their children because the children are streaming the music on Spotify? Is there stream digitally, buy physical thing going on there? But it's just not as clear cut as some of the armchair critics are making out. And the other thing is, we don't know what the future is going to be, but it'll be many different forms. It's not going to be the future streaming and that's it, or the future's downloads and that's it. It's going to be a combination of different platforms. And one of the suggestions I threw at the audience at Pop Academy here in Germany was, perhaps they're all complementary. It's not all about cannibalization. Perhaps I'd like to do a bit of streaming for £5 a month, and a bit of shopping for physical product, and a bit of downloading on iTunes. So it's not a case of, if I do this, I don't do that. And that was one of the kind of key messages I was trying to get across is, we use the term heterogeneous, the mixed behavior of the consumer, and to stop generalizing and pigeonholing consumption into one form or one type of behavior. So 3 points on this. Firstly, in understanding why there's copyright, a right to control copying, it's worth just using some classic case studies of the past to illustrate the point. Bruce Springsteen wrote a song called Born in the USA. It's a famous song. The song is about the Vietnam War and soldiers coming back from Vietnam. It's a very heartfelt song, and when you go to Vietnam, and I've been to Hanoi, it really does make you cry when you read the lyrics. It's an emotional song. What it's not about is the Republican Party of the United States of America. Bruce Springsteen is a strong Democrat with some left-leaning views. He's not a Republican. Ronald Reagan used that song to get re-elected as a Republican in the United States presidential elections. So that's a clear example of why you might want to have copyright, which is you might want to prevent somebody using that song for a cause that you don't necessarily agree with. It doesn't necessarily have to be politics, it doesn't necessarily have to be American politics, but it's just that quick example of, Born in the USA usually signals dreams and aspirations of what it means to be an American, where it's actually a heartfelt song about what's it like to be an American soldier coming back from a war that a lot of Americans didn't agree with. So that's a quick history in copyright. In terms of the complexity of copyright, you're right, it is really complex and it does need to be made simpler. I'm buying a CD, can I share it, can I sideload it? Can I sell it on? And one of the illustrations I gave in the presentation, which is that whilst we get very emotional about the file sharing question, somebody sharing a CD on the internet with no commercial gain, under law, in the UK at least, once you buy that CD, you can sell it for money in a second-hand store on the high street, which just baffles me. The second-hand product has no copyright, yet there's all these issues about file sharing on the internet. I'm not saying right or wrong, I just think it's interesting that that part of the discussion doesn't ever get raised. And that's important here in Germany, where Amazon's a big player, which is to understand that second-hand market, which we have no data for and we have no revenue for either. Last point, which is I do think there's a problem with the consumer understanding what's legal and what's illegal just now. We gave a presentation in Washington about the question of equity. Should a rights holder with their copyright take equity in a company like Simify in hope that it sells in which they can cash out and they can get some of that upside benefit. And this comes from developments in digital music, such as Last FM selling for $280 million without paying a royalty. So you would argue that music was part of that $280 million sale price. That's interesting for me. Now, on the panel in Washington was one of those startup companies. In this instance, it was Project Playlist. And Project Playlist had a new innovative digital service in America. They claim to have over 6 million people using the service. I don't know whether that's true or not. But he made a point in his introduction. He said, I have got equity deals in place with 2 labels. And he had litigation lawsuits from the other 2 labels. So 2 labels had equity stakes in Project Playlist, and 2 labels were throwing litigation at Project Playlist. So he said, so the consumer can consume half a track, was his point. Now, it's a little comical point, and that was him talking, not me. But I stood back and said, how's the consumer supposed to know whether there's equity deals in place? How's the consumer supposed to understand whether that service was legal and now it's legal? And it's worth keeping in mind this. YouTube was considered piracy up until the PRS, the first society in the world, licensed it. It then became a legal form of consuming music. It didn't change. YouTube was YouTube, but it went from black market to legal market overnight because it took out a license. Radio, back in the old days, was illegal until it became licensed. Radio didn't change, it just became legal and then produced royalties to the songwriter. So it's worth understanding the historical dimension to this, which is, who does the dancing and who calls the tune? Is it for the radio service to adjust to the legal system, or for the legal system to adjust to the radio system and make that service legal? Yeah, the consumer at the other end, 1, do they care? 2, should they care? 3, are they confused? 4, should they even be confused? Should we have a system that just makes it easier for the consumer to engage in legal music? There you get into a question of what's often termed carrots and sticks. So I, as a consumer, a hypothetical consumer, might use MiniNova, an illegal service to consume all of my music, of which nothing goes back to the artist and the songwriter who made that music. What would make me go to Spotify, which is a legal service where something goes back to that artist, that songwriter? And that's where you're trying to ask a question of, what do you need most? Sticks to penalize the consumer or prevent the consumer from using that service? Or carrots to try and displace them to a legal venue? And that was a key point about what I think's happened in the UK is lots of legal venues where consumers are going and doing stuff. They're not going to legal venues, they're going to legal venues. It's not clear cut yet, it's not the final solution or anything like that, but it's very encouraging to see that taking place. And it's worth keeping in mind that Spotify is a P2P application. So when you get people saying we need to take down P2P and champion Spotify, Spotify is P2P. One of the developers developed uTorrent, an illegal service. And it's worth just questioning this. Carrots and sticks, what we surely got to understand is not all carrots are the same, and some are more effective than others. So what's the most effective carrot to get that consumer away from an illegal venue and towards somewhere which is licensed in which songwriters and artists see royalties?